This MTA security video shows a group of 5 men on a Manhattan-bound 7 train. 2 of them stole bags from a sleeping 69-year-old passenger and a fight starts.
So this is just the latest in a string of armed altercations involving homeless people in the New York City subway. Incidents which often start underground but end in the emergency room. And now that this crime surge has been going on for the last 4 weeks and counting, New Yorkers are starting to doubt whether or not our leaders are keeping the subway as safe as they claim they are. Because to many people, it sure seems like this entire network of trains and stations is just getting more dangerous every single day.
From the Union Square subway station to the Uptown number 2 train and the E train at Columbus Circle, unnerved riders coming face to face with unstable people.
It's really unfortunate. People can't travel, they can't take the train or a bus, and they have to always look over their back.
Mental health crisis, and it doesn't seem to be being dealt with.
We know that too many New Yorkers cycle between the hospital and homelessness.
We can't stand for that in New York City. The subway system's way too important. The subway system has to be there for individuals to be able to take in safety and predictability.
Governor Kathy Hochul cited that mental health crisis in announcing plans to spend $1 billion to revamp care and change New York's involuntary commitment laws.
We need to ensure that those who are suffering from severe mental illness are getting the care they need, and we're also protecting the innocent bystanders on our subways and on our streets.
For many, it's an endless cycle going from the street to the emergency room, then back out onto the street.
So, in a surprising twist, the 4 surviving men who assaulted an armed homeless man are now the ones facing justice. But what nobody's talking about is this incident took place inside a subway car, and that's where New Yorkers have been begging for more security for the last year. Not the entrances where police and troops have been stationed. Plus, the entire time incidents like this have been going on, we've been told by our leaders to stop imagining things because overall subway crime is down. But the reality is that since 2020, assaults and other types of crime down here remain elevated to levels everyone who's ever ridden the train knows are unacceptable. But the mayor understands this, which is why he's now risking the wrath of New York City progressives by removing homeless people from the subway if they pose a danger to themselves or others. Something activists say is immoral and wrong. However, it's hard to see how allowing someone who's in need of rehab to wander the subway with a weapon, believing the resources to help them don't exist, is even close to compassionate. And that brings us to the real reason why we've got a subway system that's dangerous. Neglecting people, that's not compassionate, and instead it just encourages those who need help to come down here and fend for themselves. But now that riders are terrified and elections are coming up, something's finally being done to try and save the subway and those who call it home. However, with the NYPD chronically short-staffed, it's hard to see what New York's finest will be able to do in the face of a justice system that has stacked the deck against common sense solutions to crime and lawlessness by releasing people with dozens of prior arrests who end up right back on the streets where they continue to be a threat to themselves and others. And that's why, as you're about to see, our mayor has decided to start removing homeless people from the subway, in some cases against their will. So here we are at the 34th Street Herald Square subway station, and as you can see, this new crackdown, it's real, it's happening. In fact, this entire area where we are right now used to be a place where people sadly were trying to reside as if it were their home or apartment. And even though activists say that allowing people to stay here is the right thing to do because everyone's free and this is a public place, neglecting people and letting them think that this is where they have to sleep every night, that's not compassionate either.
This young man, homeless and disheveled, surrounded by a joint response team made up of 2 NYPD officers, a social worker, and a nurse. After protesting for several minutes, the handcuffs stay on. One of the many involuntary removals the Adams administration conducts on a weekly basis in the New York City.
So, 1 month ago, before crime spiked in the subway, this particular station had 96 people living in it. The New York Post referred to it as an underground wasteland, and right over over here, you can see the area where people were residing. This little area, which is the former entrance to a mall, which is now closed. And the reason city officials are now doubling their efforts to help those who might think this is the only place for them to stay to leave is because the city does have shelters that are available for people, and they're not in a noisy, loud, dangerous public transit system. But here's the problem. These efforts can only go so far, which is why the New York City subway is still the site of an ongoing humanitarian crisis. But before we get into why this new plan may ultimately fail to help the homeless and make the subway less safe, you've got to realize that overall unchecked lawlessness down here is the reason we find ourselves in a dangerous environment. For example, it's illegal to carry a knife in the New York City public transit system, but dangerous individuals are down here carrying them and nothing is being done about it. And that's bad news because the individual in this photo was armed and went after other commuters randomly one afternoon.
Why'd you do it, Jamar? What's that, sir? Anything to say to the victim, sir?
So the man in this video, he's 52 years old. He's now been arrested 88 times, and allowing him to live in the subway was bad for him and it was bad for everybody else. And he's not alone. There's still many other people down here who need assistance and may not even know that assistance is out there. He was apparently well known to law enforcement, and security camera footage shows him carrying a weapon at various points, which kind of makes you wonder what these cameras are for if they record crimes and nobody does anything about them. But people carrying weapons, that's just one type of lawlessness taking place down here. If you happen to look down at your feet, if you dare, you'll see a very good reason not to walk around with open-toed shoes, a reason that could also contribute to a lot of the problems that people are experiencing down here. Regardless, the lawless environment down here is why the mayor knows his plan is facing an uphill battle. Yet he's trying to work within the restricted confines of New York City's laws to help the homeless, although some say those laws tie the hands of justice so they can't help anyone or keep anyone safe. Something riders down here are reminded of every single time they take the train.
There has been a pervasive misunderstanding of the law in New York.
Brian Stetton, the mayor's senior advisor on severe mental illness, says response teams perform about 130 involuntary removals a week under a broader interpretation that determines whether a person is a, quote, danger to themselves or...
So, is Mayor Adams perfect? No, nobody is. But this is the first time in recent memory anybody in charge has tried to interpret New York's progressive laws in a non-progressive manner. But now the problem is that if someone's in need of mental health treatment, how do you help them enter a program if they aren't interested in it? And that's why the mayor is now fighting for this Supportive Interventions Act, which would apparently make that process easier. Apparently, right now, if somebody's in trouble, the best the city can do is to involuntarily commit that person for a period of 72 hours, after which that person will regain their freedom, and if they're in a bad place, may go on to continue being a danger to themselves and others. And that's why critics say you've got people with dozens of arrests in the subway who keep coming back here, and no one can stop them. They're in a destructive cycle, and that cycle leads to elevated levels of danger down here that terrify riders. And as you're about to see, the current way city officials are forced to go about helping people who are down here and may not know they need help isn't really working.
It's a direct response to the public's palpable concern over innocent people being victimized above and below ground, from suspect Ramon Rivera to Sebastian Cepeda, who's accused of walking out of a homeless shelter and then setting a woman on...
So the way this outreach program works now is law enforcement officers accompany aid workers who make contact with people who look like they need help. They're looking for people who appear to be incapacitated, sleeping, or just unable to care for themselves. And if they see somebody who's obviously in that predicament, the right thing that any of us would do for a family member of ours who was in that spot would be to go out of our way to make an intervention and help them. And that's what the city's trying to do. Like, just look at this place. If any of us knew that someone that we cared about was living down here and didn't know that there was help out there for them, or that anybody cared about them, we'd be down here in a heartbeat, pleading with them, doing what we could, dragging them out if necessary to get them to a place where we could help them. That's compassion. However, the reason you've got elevated levels of crime, elevated levels of danger, and riders who are scared is because for a long time we thought compassion was just letting someone sleep on the ground over here, which, as you're about to see, unfortunately still happens, as the rules New York City has handicap law enforcement and our aid workers so that they can't make a difference. And sadly, that's why things down here are continuing to get worse. So here we are in another level of this very same station, and as you can see, the humanitarian crisis going on down here is still here. And this is in spite of the mayor announcing a new $650 million push to help that crisis and assist those who might think that living in the subway is their best option. But that's because, as you're about to see, New York's laws don't allow anybody who needs long-term help to get it. Instead, there are just short-term solutions, which might actually be making this entire problem worse.
What it comes down to is what you're describing is someone who actually is not ready for discharge from the hospital.
The reality is the man who was involuntarily removed minutes earlier will likely be back down here in the subway system in a matter of days. A function, critics say, of what amounts to a revolving door of short-term treatment. Am I wrong in saying that?
So here this city official is telling Pix 11 that every single person they help get off the subway, a lot of those people, once their short-term treatment ends, they just go right back. No one's actually benefiting from this except the people who get paid to enact the treatment, making these short-term solutions just a waste of money in the minds of many people. Plus, these aid workers, this is a dangerous environment. They need to be accompanied by police who could be riding the trains and patrolling them to keep people safe. Specifically on the very trains themselves, where crime just doesn't seem to stop in spite of the presence of the troops we've got down here. And this is for two reasons. First of all, you've got people down here who might be a danger to themselves or others. And secondly, you've got people down here who are just not afraid of law enforcement whatsoever. They know the police can't do anything. Sure, they'll get arrested, but they'll be right back out on the streets. And that's because most of the crimes that take place down here, assault, robbery, these are just misdemeanors. They've been decriminalized, and now criminals benefit from that.
Am I wrong in saying that the system as it exists right now does discharge that person?
You're certainly correct that we've done that a lot historically.
In the worst cases, there are devastating consequences for a system's failure to find, keep track, and successfully help someone experiencing mental health issues. Stanton acknowledges it's a difficult situation.
One of the important...
Now, here's how to interpret what you just heard. The city can spend unlimited amounts of money on outreach programs, supported housing, treatment programs, you name it, but if the people who those programs are for are under no obligation to take them, they don't know they need them, and they refuse, how are those programs going to help anybody? It sounds like those in charge of them are admitting that no help is going to come of this. And as you just heard, somebody who gets released from one of these programs, they may end up roaming the system or going to another location, trying to lie low, making themselves harder to monitor and track down if they ever do become further distressed. In fact, you could even say that these revolving door short-term programs are actually part of the problem, because if someone down here is arrested or apprehended and then released, they've now got practice interacting with and possibly evading law enforcement. Does that mean that somebody who finds themselves down here is a criminal? No, not necessarily, but it does mean that when somebody is a criminal, short-term treatment or catch and release type programs are just giving them more experience living a life of crime.
From the Union Square subway station to the Uptown number 2 train and the E train at Columbus Circle. Unnerved riders coming face to face with unstable people.
All of those things, I think, contributes to our own mental health of not feeling, being anxious all the time.
Ann Williams Isa.
So that's the sad reality of the New York City subway system. Our leaders, like the mayor, look at it and say, this is a disaster, we've got to do something. But then our laws and our legislature seems to have no interest in actually giving the mayor the tools that he would need to make a difference. Like laws that would allow involuntary commitment on a longer term basis for those who are unfit to care for themselves and won't be after 72 hours. And it's incredibly misguided to think that allowing somebody who's in a state like that to live on their own in a public transportation network is compassionate. Nobody would let a loved one do such a thing that they cared about, and if the city cares about those who live in it, we shouldn't allow that to happen here either. Especially when doing so has allowed crime to happen, not at out-of-the-way stations, but places like this, 34th Street, right below Macy's. And it's not fair for a city as rich and well-off as New York to have stupid laws that mean we have to neglect those who are vulnerable. And a lot of these individuals, they're normal people, just like me or you. They've just gotten a raw hand in life, and that was too much for them. They thought they had to bear it alone, and here they are now living on the streets thinking that they've got nobody out there who could possibly support them, yet we're spending all this money to do that, and getting absolutely no results. Not for the people who ride the trains, not for the people who are living in the trains. It's a bad system. And you know what this also proves? It proves that progressive non-solutions, like dumping troops and police into the subway without giving them the tools to actually do their jobs or get people off the streets, don't help anyone either. All of this activity is still happening after a massive troop deployment and after extra police officers have been sent underground. They can't do anything. Their hands are tied. Meanwhile, we've got people sleeping on the ground beneath Macy's who think that's the only option out there for them. And then we've got people who are on the trains who are now in danger as they try to commute and work for a living. What do you think about all this? What do you think New York City could do to help those who are in need and make the subways safer at the exact same time? Should we pass new laws? Should we get rid of old ones? Let me know. I'll see you in the next video.